Well, it's 3 o'clock. I think we can start the session while gradually people are coming in. Good afternoon. My name is Stijn Daniels, and on behalf of the steering committee of the ICTCT, I wish you a warm welcome to this webinar. Nice to meet that many people in this webinar, and a special welcome also to the speaker of today, Sven Ove Hansson from Stockholm. Before we start with the actual webinar, a few words about oncoming activities of the ICTCT. Just to remind you, for those who are not familiar, that you can always go to our website, www.ictct.net, and register for our regular newsletters. And some of the oncoming activities that are warmly recommended are first the extra conference that we will have in Quebec in Canada in the month May, together with the Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals and the Parachute. And we are very honored to organize together with them a conference about innovative interventions and technologies for safer roads. And we certainly hope to contribute there with a global perspective. Abstract submissions are closed, but the registrations for the conference are open, and most welcome to meet us there. Then we have the next annual conference of ICTCT in October in Berlin, together with or organized by the German Aerospace Center, DLR. And important there is that abstracts still can be submitted until the end of March. So most welcome to submit your abstract for our annual conference. Then we also have, in close connection to that annual conference, the Traffic Safety Researchers course. Certainly interesting for people who are early in their career as a researcher, but certainly also interesting for people who may have moved from other domains to traffic safety and want to get a bit familiar with research methods, terminology, approaches, policy perspectives of road safety in that course. Then we have SICTCT, as you may know, a number of subcommittees. One of the subcommittees is the Nordic Road Safety Transport Safety Academy that is organizing every year a research school, this year in mid-May in Trondheim in Norway, and also most welcome there to be present. Certainly, that is certainly focusing on PhD researchers who want to openly discuss their proposals, their approach, and get feedback from experienced researchers. And then we also have the AfroSafe conference in August, organized within the framework of an Horizon project, but also meanwhile a subcommittee of ICTCT conference taking place in Winneba in Ghana, very warmly recommended. Good. Let's move on to the webinar, the talk of today. Welcome to Professor Emeritus Sven Ove Hansson. He is a professor who used to be a professor in philosophy with a very long track record and a long-standing interest in the ethics of traffic safety. So a very interesting perspective for the community of road safety researchers that is ICTCT. And we are very much looking forward to get some further insights on that. Very practically, we expect around 100 participants for the webinar today. We hope you understand that we cannot answer all the questions that may be there at once, but we foresee to have a lecture of 45 minutes. After that, there is room for questions and answers, so feel free to raise your hand and to ask a question there. But if you have questions meanwhile, don't hesitate to put them in the chat. The Q&A session will be moderated by Professor Alexei Loreshin from Lund University, and we hope you that way you will enjoy the webinar. Let's move on to the actual webinar. Maybe I should just a small practical thing. Please keep your camera on as long as possible. That's nicer for people that they see that there are some other people around, also for the one who is giving the lecture. But please mute your microphone as long as you are not speaking. Sven Ove will not use any slides already. That is nowadays innovative in itself. So we are very pleased to have him here. And please, Sven Ove, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot for this nice introduction. According to the best available statistics, about 1.3 million people die on roads every year. These are 1.3 million preventable deaths every year. And that, if anything, is certainly an ethical problem. But still, the ethics of traffic safety is remarkably underdeveloped as compared to other areas of applied ethics. So one might ask why it is so seldom that we talk about traffic safety in ethical terms. I will try to show that this is at least in part due to the fact that we have developed some sort of insensitivity to deaths and severe injuries in road traffic, and even a tolerance for their causes that we do not have for other types of preventable deaths and injuries. And I will also try to propose how we need to change our ways of thinking about road traffic and its risks in order to achieve an ethically adequate response to the lack of safety in road traffic. I would like to begin by just showing how big the difference is between prevailing attitudes to death risks on roads and in other places. And I will do this in a way that's typical for philosophers with an hypothetical example. Suppose that a manufacturer of chainsaws starts selling a model with a very strong motor. The user regulates the speed of the chain by pressing a handle. If the handle is pressed to the bottom, then the chain will move so fast that the user cannot control the saw, and there are severe risks then both for the user and for bystanders. The saw has an instrument on which users can see if they press the handle too hard, and it is legally prohibited to pass certain marks on that instrument. But in spite of this, accidents are common, and hundreds of people die every year due to chainsaws being run at too high speeds. End of hypothetical example. But I have presented this example quite a few times to various audiences, and as yet I have never encountered a person who claimed that these accidents should just be blamed on careless users of the saw. We all seem to agree that the manufacturer is responsible for these accidents, and that these saws should urgently be provided with a speed limiter that prevents them from being run at dangerous speed. And now let's turn to an actual example, namely that a manufacturer of motor vehicles sells a model with a very strong motor. The user regulates the speed of the vehicle by pressing a pedal. And if the pedal is pressed to the bottom, then the vehicle will move so fast that the user cannot control it. And there are grave risks both to the user and to others who are inside the vehicle or can be hit by it. People outside who can be hit by it. Now, this vehicle, just like the chainsaw, has an instrument, in this case, an instrument on which users can see if they press the pedal too hard. And it is, just as for the chainsaw, legally prohibited to pass certain marks on that instrument. But unsurprisingly, in this case as well, accidents are common. And as we know, hundreds of thousands of people die every year due to motor vehicles being run at too high speeds. But in this case, the conventional approach is to put the blame on the users, that is, the drivers, and continue to allow the sale and use of vehicles that can be driven at dangerous speeds that are prohibited on virtually all roads. Of course, if we want to prevent future accidents, then we should focus on those causal factors that it is possible to change. It is not feasible to make all drivers always follow the speed limits, but it is feasible to change the technical construction of vehicles so that they at least cannot be driven at excessively high speeds that are both dangerous and illegal on all roads. It's also feasible, but takes a bit more technology to provide all vehicles with speed limiters that are more advanced and can, for instance, prevent speeds just in front of a school or some other place where that are too high for that place, but are not too high for all roads. But then, why don't we do that? Why do we allow vehicles that can be driven at these speeds? Is it because there are so many drivers who want to drive at illegal speeds? Is it because of cowardly politicians? Or is it because of industries involved with much more money and larger public relations departments than the chainsaw industry? Or is it perhaps because driving at high speeds is conceived as an issue of freedom? I think the freedom argument is part of the explanation because we know from many examples that resistance to speed limits, resistance to traffic surveillance, resistance to drunk driving legislations and other life-saving traffic safety measures is commonly expressed in terms of the freedom of automobile drivers. It is claimed that such measures threaten individual freedoms and that they are steps towards some sort of nanny state where grown-ups are treated by the government as children. But there is an obvious problem with the idea that driving at high speed on public roads is some sort of liberty or freedom. The problem is that the liberty that political philosophers have praised, the liberty that we have strong reasons to defend and extend, is the freedom to make your own choices as long as you do not harm others. It is not a freedom to do whatever you like, even if it makes others suffer. It is certainly not a freedom to risk the lives of others. That you can easily check by reading the philosophers who have strongly proposed and advanced ideas of freedom, like John Stuart Mill, who was very clear that freedom is not freedom to hurt others. So therefore, driving at higher speeds is a freedom for some at the expense of death or severe injuries for others. So it is not a freedom that anyone should have in a civilized society. Nevertheless, that argument is used. Unfortunately, it's not the only example of misuse of the idea of freedom in attempts to prevent social progress. I would like to mention just one quite interesting and illustrative historical example from Britain in 1848. In that year, a Public Health Act was proposed in that country. One of the main stipulations of that act was that local authorities should be required to ensure access to clean water, sewerage, and other facilities needed to ensure hygienic living conditions. This proposal had many supporters, but it also met with considerable resistance. One member of the British Parliament said that such a law would be, and I quote, a departure from the free principles of the British Constitution. One of his colleagues in Parliament warned against what he called a constant meddling and dictation that would follow if local authorities were required to offer the inhabitants clean water and hygienic sewerage. And yet another MP claimed that this law would place, as he said, despotic powers in the hands of government. And the London newspaper argued that, and I quote, a little dirt and freedom may after all be more desirable than no dirt at all and slavery. End quote. However, the prevalence of such sentiments receded in the coming decades, and today we do not hear much talk about the importance of being free to drink contaminated water or to walk on filthy streets. So, did the Public Health Act deprive Brits of some freedom? Yes, possibly. But in retrospect, the freedom to drink dirty water may not have been worth having. And there are many other freedoms that we can rather easily be without. Suppose that you go to a household appliances store and look for a microwave oven that can emit microwaves when the lid is open. You will be told that no such ovens are produced or marketed. If you go to the hardware store and look for power tools with uncovered live electrical parts, you will be equally disappointed. All the power tools on sale have sturdy protective shields to keep the users safe from electric shocks. So what has happened? Has the nanny state invaded the shops and stopped them from providing the articles you asked for? Yes, in a sense it has, since most countries have regulations enforcing safety standards for microwave ovens, power tools, and a myriad of other products. And no one seems to care for the liberty to avail themselves of unsafe products. And similarly, no one seems to ask for the liberty of remaining unbelted in an aircraft during takeoff or landing. In fact, I think few would even care to know if it is the so hated government, or if it is the airline, or if it is perhaps some international aviation organization that has decided that we all have to use a safety belt on board. We simply do not have a need to challenge the pilot's requirement that we use the belt. In fact, safety belts on airplanes came already with the first commercial aviation in the 1930s, and there doesn't seem to ever have been any resistance against them. One of the most interesting examples of the acceptance and non-acceptance of safety requirements is the use of protective helmets. This is quite a long history. Helmets have been worn by soldiers for at least 4.5 millennia, and there doesn't seem ever to have been any uproar or mutinies against orders to wear protective headgear on the battlefield. In the 1930s, some construction workers started to use surplus military helmets provided by their trade unions. Soon it became more and more common for employers to provide helmets to all construction workers and make their use mandatory. There doesn't seem to have been any protests against this practice. Freedom-loving construction workers have looked for other freedoms in their lives than that of being killed by a brake falling from above. Motorcycle helmets were introduced in World War II for Allied military message carriers. The helmets were obligatory, but they were also welcomed by the motorcyclists. There are no reports of resistance to the requirement to wear a helmet. The use of motorcycle helmets on public roads began in the 1960s, and they gradually became mandatory in more and more countries. Today, they are obligatory in almost all countries throughout the world, with the remarkable exception of the United States. But it was close in the United States, because in 1977, almost all American states had mandatory motorcycle helmet laws. But then a large number of states have repealed these laws. In most of these cases, a law requiring all motorcyclists to wear a helmet was replaced by a law that only required young riders to wear a helmet. You would probably expect this change to lead to a considerable increase in the number of adult motorcyclists dying on the road, but no increase among young motorcyclists, since they were still required to wear a helmet. But that is not what happened. Instead, there was a large increase in fatalities among motorcyclists in all age groups. For instance, in Florida, the number of motorcycle fatalities among riders younger than 21, that was a limit, nearly tripled. That is, became 3 times as high after the helmet law was changed in this way. Now, how did that happen? Weren't the young riders supposed to wear helmets? Yes, they were supposed to do so. What happened is that they followed the example of elder riders whom they looked up to. Researchers who have studied this have called it a rite of passage effect, taking the form of older children giving up their helmets to signify maturity. Now, this example tells us something extremely important, both for traffic safety and I would say for many other issues that have to be dealt ethically. The idea behind repealing the helmet law for adults was that grown-ups are free to do whatever they like. It only concerns themselves if they wear a helmet or not. But the evidence from Florida shows us that this is not so. Every grown-up who refrains from using a helmet sets an example for others, both adults and children, that can contribute to making them doing the same. The effect on others of only one person not wearing a helmet is small, but the sum of the effects of many helmetless drivers is large and can create a sort of helmetless culture. Whether we like it or not, we humans are not mental solitarians who make decisions and choices independently of each other. To the contrary, we are herd creatures. We all observe what others do, and we tend strongly to follow trends, in particular trends among people whom we feel akin to. If you speed, others will feel encouraged to do the same. If you use a bicycle helmet, then that can have a considerable influence on people whom you know, perhaps your children, if you have children. And it can also have an influence on the larger number of people, namely all those who see you riding with the helmet. And as I see it, these herd effects have important implications for policy decisions. Asking someone to use a helmet is not only an invitation to that person to protect herself. It is also an invitation to help creating a safety culture that induces others, including children, to wear a helmet. In this way, the helmet on your head contributes to making others safe. It may be a small contribution, but this is one of the cases when many small contributions can add up to something important. So it follows from this that a policy decision to require motorcyclists and cyclists to use helmets should not be seen as a paternalistic or nanny state decision that requires each person to do something that only protects that person, her or himself. It is a decision to create a safety culture in which we all contribute to the safety of others by being good examples. Legislation requiring the use of seatbelts has created such safety cultures for seatbelts throughout the world. Legislation on motorcycle helmets has done the same, with the deplorable exception of the United States. And it remains, in most parts of the world, to achieve a similar improvement in the safety of bicyclists. Public health activists in mid-19th century Britain understood this. They knew that they could not prevent people from drinking contaminated and unhealthy water by just admonishing them to stop doing so. Instead, they created the right conditions for safe behavior by constructing a system of water pipes that distributed potable water to all households. In doing so, they wisely ignored vociferous claims that providing clean water to people was an infringement on their liberty. And I think we can learn something from these public health activists. So in the same way, if we want motorists to follow the speed limits, we cannot in practice achieve this by just entreating them to do so. We can, however, make sure that vehicles have appropriate inbuilt speed limiters. Let me again make a comparison. We do not prevent burglary by keeping all our front doors unlocked and waging campaigns to make prospective burglars refrain from uninvited visits in other people's homes. Then why do we try to prevent driving at dangerous speeds by providing cars that can be driven at such speeds and tell all car drivers to refrain from doing so. Although I assume there are more people who want to drive at high speeds than people wanting to enter other people's homes without being invited. So it simply doesn't make sense. And similarly, if we want to protect the next generation of cyclists from severe head injuries, why do we then let them grow up in an environment where, as in Sweden, where I live today, helmet use is only mandatory until you are 15, and the vast majority of adult cyclists do not use a helmet? We are making the same mistakes concerning bicycle helmets as the mistake concerning motorcycle helmets in Florida and other US states that I just mentioned. And unfortunately, this costs lives and this gives rise to very severe injuries among cyclists of all ages. In order to make roads safer and put an end to the road traffic pandemic, which we have just now, we need, in terms of severe injuries and deaths, we need to break the pattern of acceptance. We need to actively repudiate the common claim that the death toll in road traffic is a price that we have to pay for our mobility. The large difference in road mortality between different countries shows that there is no price that we have to pay for mobility, only different degrees of passivity and resignation. Studies of the road deaths that occur even in countries that have less traffic accidents than others, such as Sweden, such studies show that each of these accidents was preventable and therefore unnecessary, and most certainly not part of a price that we need to pay for moving around. So instead of the current thought pattern of resignation, we need to realize and act upon the preventability of road traffic deaths and injuries. From a basic ethical point of view, this means that we have to recognize that each death or serious injury in road traffic is one too many. And from this ethical idea follows a simple but powerful policy principle, namely, we have to work towards a society with no deaths or serious injuries in road traffic. This is called Vision Zero, and it has been adopted as a policy principle in many countries, first of all Sweden, but now quite a few others. And as I see it, it is a necessary starting point for an ethically defensible policy of traffic safety. Since Vision Zero contradicts conventional approaches to road traffic, it is no surprise that it has often been criticized. I would like to refute 3 common misunderstandings. The first of these misunderstandings is that Vision Zero denies the importance of human behavior and human responsibility in road traffic. To the contrary, the creation of a safety culture in which safe behavior is self-evident for everyone is an important part of Vision Zero. But experience shows that this cannot be achieved by just telling individual road users that they must change their behavior. We need to construct vehicles and roads that are such that they induce safe behavior and that they also reduce the consequences of mistakes. So changes in the construction of vehicles and roads are necessary to achieve safer human behavior in road traffic. The second misunderstanding is that Vision Zero requires that we immediately introduce all traffic safety measures that are at all possible at any costs. Those who claim this have not realized that a vision is something different from a plan for what to do immediately. Vision zero means that we see all traffic deaths and serious injuries as failures, and that as long as such events take place, more must be done to prevent them. And this, again, applies that there is no price in terms of human deaths that is acceptable and worth paying, and that no occurrence of deaths in road traffic should be treated as satisfactory. But it doesn't mean that everything can be achieved at once. And the third of these three misunderstandings is the claim that Vision Zero is an extreme view according to which traffic safety has higher priority than everything else. That is, in my view, a grave misrepresentation of Vision Zero. Because what Vision Zero requires is, in fact, to the contrary, that we treat road safety in the same way that we already treat most other issues of safety. To illustrate this, let me introduce one more hypothetical example. Suppose that a chief of police tells you that they have hired a cost-benefit analyst to plan their work. Preventing crimes is expensive, and we cannot pay any amount of money to do so. So to optimize preventive police activities, the cost-benefit analysis has used the standard value of life method and assigned the highest monetary value that could be paid to prevent a murder and the corresponding highest monetary costs for preventing a rape. Based on this, the analyst has concluded that if police activities against these crimes are optimal, then the expected number of murders will be 11 and the expected number of rapes will be 43 in the district in question. Police measures that would indeed lead to a lower incidence of these crimes would involve higher implementation costs than what could be justified in the calculation, given the prices put on the prevention of these crimes. Since these are almost exactly the numbers of these crimes in the district, says the chief of police, everything is fine and nobody has reason for complaint. I am sure that such a statement by a police chief would lead to an outrage. The chief of police would have to recant and declare instead that the police considers every murder or rape to be one too much, and that they will not use values of life or any other similar construct in their decision-making. The cost-benefit analyst would be fired and, I'm sorry to say, would probably be hired by a traffic planning agency instead. What this shows is that the traditional approach to the prevention of serious crimes is that criminality should be reduced as far as can, and that no incidence above zero is satisfactory. And this is actually precisely what Vision Zero says about deaths and serious injuries in road traffic. Thus, Vision Zero is not the introduction of a new and extreme way of thinking. It is the introduction into traffic safety as the same approach that we apply in crime prevention and many other areas. In other words, Vision Zero is the normalization of road traffic as a human activity. According to conventional cost-benefit analysis, if a sufficiently large number of car drivers gain 5 minutes a day on their daily ride to and from work, then this outweighs the death of a person or two in road accidents. It would not be surprising if posterity will look upon this way of thinking which has survived into the 21st century in about the same way that we today think about the fatal gladiator games of antiquity. So we do not use a value of life when we decide on police activities, and neither do we use it when we discuss investments in rescue services, the construction of a new hospital, or a host of other issues that affect life and death. Why then can't we plan road infrastructure investments without using a value of life? I would say the answer is simple. We can. We can do without it. Instead of cost-benefit analysis, we can use cost-effectiveness analysis and calculate for each proposed infrastructure investment the expected number of saved lives per unit of invested money. Such calculations can be based on the same information that is now collected for a cost-benefit analysis. And such cost-benefit analysis will tell us which projects are most urgent to implement, given that we assign higher priority to saving lives than to other goals, such as reducing travel time. But is that the right priority? Well, let me then remind you that the third article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, and certainly worth reading, not too seldom, it says, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. It does not say everyone who is not traveling in a road has that right. It says that we have that right, and it's very general. And the declaration does not condone the sacrifice of one person's life for any economic or other advantages accrued by others. So if we take ethics and human rights seriously, then I think we have no other choice than to give the prevention of deaths and serious injuries in traffic a very high priority, just as Vision Zero proposes. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks a lot for this interesting lecture and also for keeping well an eye on the timing. So let's move on to the questions and answer session. And for that, I pass the floor to Alexei Lorishin.
Yes, so I would suggest let's build, you just write your name in the chat and I will call you out. And since we are all in a meeting, you can just unmute yourself and start talking, but I will try to keep an order so that one person speaks at a time. So I see a question directly. Yes, Sepp Uppers, can you please speak up?
Yes. Hello, my name is Jesse Pappers. I'm a researcher at the KU Leuven Institute for Mobility. Thank you for the very interesting presentation, and it was also great that there was no PowerPoint presentation. I think that was very nice. I'm personally very much in favor of wearing a helmet on a motorcycle. I'm not quite sure about the when cycling, and even the Flemish Cycling Association is against mandatory helmet laws because there's also research that suggests if you implement mandatory helmet laws, people will stop cycling. At least they will do it less often. And that's why my question is, shouldn't we distinguish between endangering oneself, which is what you do when you do not wear a motorcycle helmet, and endangering others, which is what you do when you speed? Because I would very much agree with the part about the speeding. I do not agree with the part about wearing a helmet while cycling.
Well, I think what we have to recognize that not wearing a helmet contributes to a culture of helmetless cycling. And in that way, not wearing a helmet is not only a matter of taking a risk for yourself, it is a matter of contributing to risk for others. I can take another example. When stopping as a pedestrian, when stopping in front of red lights, I often see other people who stop in front of the red lights and look at children who are there, because they know that if they pass the road, they will contribute to a dangerous behavior when there is a red light for pedestrians, and they don't want to do that when children are watching. So typically people, I don't have statistics to show that, but I believe that there are people who refrain from crossing with a red light when there are children seeing them, because they realize that that would have such an effect. And I would say there is in one state in Australia, I think the helmet laws have been implemented. I don't think people have stopped going by bicycle there. And what we see in the situation is very simple in Sweden. I see people, grown-ups, not using helmets, and I see young people who have just passed the limit stop using helmets because they don't think it's dangerous to their heads when they are adults or whatever they think. But that's dangerous, and I think by wearing a helmet, you help creating a good safety culture. And that's the same. I mean, why would you wear a helmet on a construction site even when there's no construction ongoing? The reason is that if you start making exceptions, you will destroy the safety culture. Now we have a safety culture that works fairly well on construction sites, at least bigger construction sites. Everyone wears a helmet, and there's no problem with that. If some people come there and don't use a helmet, they will destroy the safety culture. And now when it comes to bicycle helmets, we don't have that safety culture. We have to create it. And if we manage to create a safety culture where it's self-evident that you have a helmet on when you go on a bicycle, that will save many lives, because there are very serious bicycle accidents happening. And the Flemish Cyclist Association, as well as the Swedish one, are on the wrong side of history.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see Lars Ekman has a comment which is closely related to this. Lars, can you speak up?
Yeah, thanks, Sven, for a nice lecture, by the way. I think it's important that we puncture this myth that wearing a helmet should stop people from going by bike, to the same way as it shouldn't stop us going by car if we have to wear seatbelts. And we actually did a literature study a couple of years ago, hired some Australian researchers looking at these myths and stating that there was very low evidence, very few studies showing that you have a decrease in cycling when you have mandatory bicycle helmet law. You have examples on the other way around as well. But I think, Sven, you answered in a much better way than these statistics, because it's very strange that we claim that we have cycle organizations that don't like bicycle helmets. I don't think we have any mountain climbing organizations thinks that helmets for climbers it's only for the coward one. Or an car motor organization claiming that we don't need winter tires during winter. It's only you're skilled enough, you can do it without it.
Yes, I see a request here in the chat to send the link on that report. It was by Jake Oliver.
Yeah, I can see if I can find it, but it's a couple of years ago. But I think it's on the Swedish Transport Administration's homepage somewhere down digged in the sea there.
Yes. Okay. And Per Gårder, I see you have a comment. There is a question before. I have not forgotten about that. So, Zbinek, please don't feel that I ignore you. I will come back to you. I just want to conclude this discussion on helmets.
Okay. So I lived in Stockholm for 10 years, worked at KTH, and I realized that I needed a helmet when riding a bicycle. However, I also learned that if automobile drivers wore helmets, we would save more lives than if we have a mandatory bicycle helmet law. And with respect to helmets, downhill skiing is another example. When I moved to the United States in 1992, nobody wore helmets downhill skiing. Now everybody does. And Sweden was a little bit ahead, I think, but it's interesting with the safety culture. However, finally, what about pedestrians? I've had one head injury myself when falling on ice, and not too serious, but I've never had a bicycle accident where I injured my head riding on paths separated from cars, but I've had one walking. And wouldn't we save a lot more lives among us elderly if we had helmet laws for pedestrians? It would be annoying, but if it's annoying to wear one as a pedestrian, should we really mandate it for bicyclists if we are away from traffic on separated paths, riding at less than 10 miles per hour?
Well, my answer to that is that we can have a discussion about helmets for pedestrians or for some pedestrians or whatever, but let us make sure that we don't take any step backwards when it comes to protection on bicycles because of that. I think there's a lot that has to be done to prevent injuries to the elderly. But I think it's having people going without helmets on bicycles because of these arguments would be very problematic. So let's. I'm sure you don't want it to have to say that, but in the current discussion with these cyclist organizations mentioned and so on, I think we have to be a bit continue to be careful about how we argue.
I 100% agree with you about speeds. So thank you.
Yes. Okay, let's go back to the question. Zbinek, can you please speak up about your question on AI?
Hello, and thank you for the lecture. My question is unrelated to the ongoing debate, and it instead focuses on the use of autonomous systems in traffic safety. Historically, we were able to code any decision-making directly, but current state-of-the-art methods, which are based on machine learning and artificial intelligence, they don't rely on explicitly programmed rules, and instead they induce decision-making patterns through training. So it is impossible to directly implement the rules, whatever they are. And I'm wondering, how can we implement the ethical principles in such a systems?
Well, I think the principles will have to be on the ethical principles will have to be on the behavior of these autonomous vehicles rather than on how that behavior is achieved. So the question is, what will be the effects on traffic safety of using them, and if the effects are beneficial, if they can reduce with certain uses and so on, certain ways of programming, if they can reduce traffic accidents and thereby reduce human suffering, then I think that technology should be used. And that is the criteria. And the criterion, I think, is not on how that is achieved, but the criterion is on what is achieved. So from an ethical point of view, I would like to see some consequentialism in this, looking at what will be the consequences.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I see a comment here from Tony about Vision Zero to be taught in school. Do you want to develop on that? Tony?
Well, when I listen, we all seem to be men of a certain age, mostly. And I wonder, are we doing enough to educate the generations coming through? How do we get this on the government's list to start educating our youngsters, our younger people, about Vision Zero, which is all wrapped up into, learning about road safety and learning about the world?
Well, I think we first need to have sufficient consensus on Vision Zero and its life-saving principles. I hope we have in some European countries sufficient of that consensus, because you can't sort of start teaching normative issues in schools without having a consensus on it. But I think it certainly has a place in schools, because schools have to teach traffic safety and traffic behavior, and then that should also include understanding the principles of traffic safety. So I would be in favor of it, but I think it requires a rather broad consensus so that it's not made into a political issue.
I would hope there was pretty much a broad consensus. There was 186 governments represented at Marrakesh last week. So I imagine most of those are aware of what Vision Zero is and are buying into it because they're there. But, okay, I get what you're saying, but I think if we just talk about it, nothing happens, unfortunately.
Okay.
Well, actually, I was present in Marrakesh last week, and it was mostly about blaming people for not wearing seat belts and stuff like that. It was a blame game. That was my impression. So there is a lot of education for professionals that need to be done. Okay, we have one more question from Laxman. Will you speak up?
Thank you very much for the lecture. So I'm from India, and so my question is, and the helmet use, especially for motorcycles, is a big problem in India. And cycle, obviously, nobody is even aware that there is a helmet requirement for cycling in India, even though the proportion is very less in India. So, I want to understand, like, what would be your recommendation from policy making viewpoint to improve safety culture? Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, I think I have cooperated with a former PhD student of mine who's working on traffic safety in countries with a much lower incomes than where I live, and I have learned from that it's one has to think a bit differently, but one doesn't have to give up against the high priority to saving human lives. So I would say that the difference between motorcycling with and without helmets in terms of human life are very large. So I wouldn't see any reason to not to have a mandatory requirement. One argument that could perhaps be used if it's needed is that the costs of treating people with serious head injuries in particular if they have permanent consequences, is extremely high. So it might measures that would make helmets less expensive would possibly have a chance to be economically beneficial. But I know too little about the situation in India to have any very sharp recommendations. But that's that much I think I can say.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I see that the time is up and we are perfectly managed to go through all the questions. So the report on effects of helmet loss is just posted, has just been posted in the chat. If you're interested, check that. I would like to thank you very much, Sven Ove, for being with us today. Thank you everyone for joining. There would be a recording of this webinar, so give us a few hours to process the video and we will upload it on the ICTCT webpage and our YouTube channel. So thank you very much, and please keep posted. Because we do have several other webinars in the pipeline. They're not announced yet, but they're scheduled. So more to come. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.